the United States is the largest debtor in the history of the world now, and it's getting much worse every week. So don't rely on, in your lifetime, the US dollar still being the world's reserve currency. Now, eventually, so conceivably, the renminbi will replace the Hong Kong dollar and eventually the US dollar in world reserves currency. How do you protect yourself? Me several trillion dollars, I'll show you a very good time. We'll all have a wonderful time. But eventually somebody's going to have to pay for all of this. Your son, my daughters are going to wake up one morning and say, wait a minute, where'd all this debt come from? What do we have to do now?
Hello，歡迎大家嚟到我要做訪問啦。咁今集我要做訪問嘅名人咧就係商品大王 Jim Rogers 啦。咁啊，終於俾我哋揾到啦。咁老人家亦都非常之 humble， 亦都係咧接受我哋嘅訪問。就可能會第一 part 啦，同埋分第二 part 啦。咁第一 part 咧，我哋可能會問啲即時嘅嘢，咁啊都係宏觀經濟嘅，咁可能係大家想知嘅商品啦。咁同埋咧，可能係關於美國啊、中美貿易嗰個關係啊，同埋嗰個貿易戰啊，呢啲問題都會喺第一 part 度問到嘅。咁記住咧，睇埋落去。咁首先之前咧，記住大家慷慨少少啊，去撳個 like 同埋 share 啦。咁有咩問題咧，就去問。咁啊，或者我都會問到Jim Rogers老人家咁啊，基本上又可以再去回答大家啊。咁啊，記住去多多分享啦。
Hello everyone, today is a very special day for us as we're extremely excited to have one of the most famous and successful investor, Mr. Jim Rogers, to join us today. Welcome, Mr. Rogers.
I am delighted, Jackie, but really I'm just a simple person. Don't say such nice things.
Yeah, you're just humble. Okay, so here's a quick overview of your amazing accomplishment over the years. So Mr. Rogers co-founded the Quantum Fund, a global investment partnership DREAM. The next 10 years, the portfolio gained more than 4,000%, while the S&P rose less than 50% during that period. And then afterwards, Mr. Rogers decided to retire at the age of 37, but did not remain idle. So he continued to manage his own portfolio and served as a professor of the finance at the famous Columbia University Graduate School of Business, and as a moderator of the Dreyfus Roundtable on WCBS and the Profit Motive on FNN. At the same time, other than investment, he also laid groundwork for his lifelong dream, an all-around world motorcycle trip of more than 100,000 miles across 6 continents. That's very interesting. So welcome again, Mr. Rogers. We're gonna start our part 1 of this interview for us. So we're gonna go quickly a little bit. Greg will do the first question. Thanks.
So Mr. Rogers, let me start off with the first question. We're currently in a very unprecedented time as we have just witnessed the worst quarter in the history of US economy. In terms of GDP, of course, the US Federal Reserve keeps on pouring on what seems to be an unlimited amount of stimulus relief and monetary easing. Do you think the US dollar will greatly depreciate in the future? And if so, what is the best way to hedge this risk for people like us who generate revenue in Hong Kong dollars? And what we concern the most is, do you think Hong Kong's competitive edge will continue to diminish due to its current economic and political struggles?
Well, Greg, that's good insight. Yes, the United States is printing staggering amounts of money. It's never happened in world history that a country has gone so deeply into debt and printed so much money. The Japanese are right behind. They're doing the same thing, but they're not as big an economy and not as important as the U.S. Quite. So it's never happened before. It's going to end very, very, very badly. It always has. Many countries and many currencies throughout history have been the dominant currency, and they've all disappeared. I mean, haven't disappeared, the countries haven't disappeared, but the status as the world's reserve currency has always disappeared when you do things like this. So American dollar will too. Having said that, I own a lot of US dollars at the moment because when the next turmoil comes, people are going to look for a safe haven, and many people think the US dollar is a safe haven for historic reasons. They're not going to go to the pound sterling or the euro or other things, or even the Japanese yen. So I own a lot of dollars. It's going to get overpriced in the next turmoil. It may even turn into a bubble, for goodness sakes, depending on how bad things get. But it's not going to last forever. We are getting towards the end. The United States is the largest debtor in the history of the world now, and it's getting much worse every week. So don't rely on, in your lifetime, the US dollar still being the world's reserve currency. Now, Hong Kong, to the Hong Kong dollar. The Hong Kong dollar is tied to the US dollar, as you know. I don't know how long that will last. What I would suspect is that once the renminbi, once the Chinese currency is convertible, that the Hong Kong dollar will disappear. I mean, the Hong Kong dollar is an expense. It's an inefficient inconvenience for anybody in Hong Kong or in China. So I don't think it can happen while the renminbi is still a blocked currency, while you cannot easily convert the renminbi. But once that happens, why do you need the Hong Kong dollar? The renminbi will probably replace the Hong Kong dollar, which leads to, will the renminbi replace the dollar? Something's going to have to replace the dollar. Something always has anyway. The renminbi is one of the things I see on the horizon that could replace the dollar. I mean, not now, it's not convertible, but eventually. So conceivably, the renminbi will replace the Hong Kong dollar and eventually the US dollar in world reserves currency. How do you protect yourself? Well, I told you what I'm doing. I own a lot of US dollars at the moment, not because I have much confidence, just because I know what's going to happen in the world. I also own silver, I own some gold as well. There are many ways to protect yourself. Gold, got gold as well. So who knows down the road? And maybe even Taiwan dollars, although I think they're probably, well, I'll leave that to you going forward. Here's a little gold too.
Sounds good. Interesting. So I just received a bunch of gold for my newborn. So I'm just going to keep all that gold for myself and for him as well.
Yeah.
Great.
It'll be useful certainly in your lifetime and certainly in his lifetime as well.
Yeah, let's hope so. Okay, thanks for your answer, Mr. Rogers. Okay, so let's go a little bit to the stock market. So we have witnessed a great deal of volatility in the stock market this year, regardless if it's called a V-shaped recovery as Trump puts it, or the K-shaped recovery as Biden puts it. So especially the NASDAQ and the tech stocks have reached all-time highs this year, even after the so-called bubble and US has gone into a recession. So does this remind you a little bit of the 2000 dot-com bubble? Or in your opinion, do you think holding tech stock right now is smart?
Well, it is a little bit like 2000 now that you mention it. Back then, they printed a huge amount of money. The Federal Reserve was worried about Y2K. I don't even know if you even remember Y2K.
I was 14 years old.
I remember the Federal Reserve has never been run by very smart people. And in those days, his name was Greenspan. He had no clue what he was doing. So he printed a lot of money, worried about Y2K, as did much of the rest of the world. So we had this big bubble, and it was a tech-based bubble. It often is throughout history, everywhere. So in that regard, yes, there are some similarities to now. But Greg, this has never happened in world history, that a government, and all governments, have printed so much money and borrowed so much money and spent so much money. Of course, we're having a recovery, whether it's what you call it, what kind of shape you want. You print me several $1 trillion, I'll show you a very good time. We'll all have a wonderful time. But eventually somebody's going to have to pay for all of this. Your son, my daughters are going to wake up one morning and say, wait a minute, where'd all this debt come from? What do we have to do now? Great Britain 100 years ago was the richest, most powerful country in the world. There was no number two, but then they went huge into debt and they lost their status. That's going to happen to the U.S. as well, I'm afraid. I don't like saying it, but down the road. But in the meantime, Greg, we're all having a very, very good time, because there's a huge amount of money being printed and spent.
Exactly. I agree 1,000% on that. Okay, so with the increasing tension between China and US, especially right before this election, Mr. Rogers, you've mentioned that when politics goes wrong, politicians always blame for foreigners. Democrats and Republicans are going to win the election by blaming the Chinese. That's a quote from one of your interviews. Would you agree that whoever is tougher on China will actually win the election? And you have also mentioned that I believe Donald Trump will win the election around a month ago or so. So right now, obviously, it's not looking good for him. Do you still believe in this, or have you changed your mind recently? Of course, with him getting the virus and everything and all the social tension happening in America. And at the end of the day, how will this tension between China and US affect the market going forward?
Wow, there are a lot of questions there. A whole lot of questions there.
Yes.
Throughout history, governments all over the world have always blamed foreigners when they have problems. It's very easy to blame foreigners. They have different skin, different hair, different language, different food. They smell bad. They always say they smell. They say their food smells bad too. I tell you how many times I've heard people say, and their food smells bad. So when people always blame foreigners, it's very easy to do so. It's absurd. It's absolutely, totally absurd because we're all the same. And if we all went down and drinking and singing and dancing together, we'd have a wonderful time and we'd find out we're all the same. But got to blame somebody, so you blame the foreigners. Nobody ever wants to say it's my fault. It's the foreigners. It's those evil foreigners. And that's what's happening now, as it's always happened everywhere. And I don't like it. It's absurd. It's not good for the world, but it's happening, and it will happen many times in your lifetime, I assure you. Where does it go? I don't know who is going to win. I do know it's very difficult to dislodge a sitting president. Historically, it has been done, but it's rare. The guy in charge can, if he needs votes over here, he spends a lot of money over here. Well, Mr. Biden, in this case, cannot spend money over there because he's not the president. But Trump can spend money wherever he needs to and will. I don't know who's going to win. We will see in November. I would suspect it's Mr. Trump, but it doesn't matter that much. It certainly matters, but not that much. We will have a new president. We will have someone in Washington in 2021.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks.
So as a world-renowned investor, many of us are aware that you are a huge advocate for investing in commodities, right? So your nickname in Chinese, I'm not sure if you know that, is literally translates as the king of commodities, right? And recently you have mentioned that holding gold and silver for long-term investment is a wise strategy. Can you explain why gold and silver or other commodities is good to hold for long-term? Also, are there any sector, geographical location or asset classes which you foresee a bigger growth in the next 3 to 5 years? How should we allocate our portfolio in the near future?
Well, Greg, I've always invested in everything all over the world, stocks, bonds, currencies, commodities, on the short side as well as the long side. So I didn't know that about commodities. Yes, I've certainly invested in commodities for many years, and including now. And I do have gold and silver. I showed you that. I stopped buying gold around 2010, but I started again around 2019. I've never sold any. Everybody should own some gold and silver as an insurance policy, if nothing else. You have health insurance. You hope you never use it, just like you hope you never need your gold insurance. But everybody should have it. And at certain times in history, you could make a lot of money owning gold and silver. In my view, we're in a period like that again, because as the world gets more and more turmoil and more chaos even, people have always turned to gold and silver in bad times when they worried about currencies or governments or anything else. So I would suspect that this is one of those. I'm not buying it at the moment. I'm waiting because there are a lot of people being forced to sell their gold and silver to buy rice, to buy food. But I hope I'm smart enough to buy more gold and silver later this year or next. And that other commodities as well. as I look around the world, Greg, bonds are certainly not cheap. Stocks in America are at all-time highs. One of the cheapest asset classes on a historic basis, commodities are very cheap right now. I mean, sugar's down 80% from its all-time high. Silver's down 55% from its all-time high. So commodities are certainly cheap on a historic basis. Does that mean you should buy them? No. If you don't know what commodities are, Greg, don't touch commodities. Don't think about buying commodities. But I do own gold and silver, and I will be buying more. I will probably buy more agricultural commodities soon because they're so cheap. There are, I hope, cheap commodities at the moment. As far as the rest of the world, well, the U.S. market is near its all-time high. China's down 40% from its all-time high. I bought more Chinese shares recently. Japan is down 40 or 50% from its all-time high. I bought more Japanese shares recently. I prefer to buy markets that are down rather than markets that are making all-time high. Russia's hated. I bought another Russian stock last week, just a couple of days ago. There are still things that are cheap that are not making all-time highs.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mr. Rogers, for your insight. So this wraps up our first part of our interview. So it was very useful information for our subscribers. Be sure to continue to look out for our part 2 and subscribe our channel. Leave any comments. We'll try to get back to you guys as soon as possible. So look out for our part 2, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
咁第一節咧訪問商品大王 Jim Rogers 咧已經完咗啦，咁大家咧記住去俾 like 同埋俾 share 啦。咁以上佢講嘅問題啦，或者大家有冇經驗過，或者有冇同感地方咧，記住下面 comment section 咧去留言啦。嚟緊咧都會有 part 2嘅 interview 啊，記住咧和權拆獎 send 定條 link 俾啲 friend 咧一齊去睇 part 2啦。咁 part 2咧我哋會繼續去講一啲嘅問題，繼續訪問Jim Rogers 啦，但會 focus 咧多少少我哋本身自我學習啊，一啲學投資嘅方面啊，有咩心得嘅，咁都會問一問佢嘅。投資唔係大學專利，下次見大家，拜拜。多謝大家踴躍參加我嘅10年財務自由嘅網上課程啊！已經 join 咗嘅朋友呢，11月份嘅 Lifetime Coaching 手拖手直播會講到環球實盤實例實測，好多唔同嘅陷阱，咁好多大家買樓盤嘅時候呢，其實都預算錯誤，計錯 return 嘅。今次呢，就一定做個實例啦，同大家分享下真實嘅樓盤 project 啊！呢個 exclusive 嘅 Lifetime Coaching 呢，係預留咗俾參加咗10年財務自由嘅同學嘅。如果你都想參加呢個 Lifetime Coaching 私人群組嘅話呢，可以去返我哋下面連結，有個1小時免費簡介同工作坊，了解更多就得㗎啦。哇！恭喜晒，贏得我哋第2塊地嘅贏家，佢哋贏到我哋禮物籃入邊呢大獎港幣100蚊現金啊！我一睇到對白先知道㗎咋，咁好彩請食飯啦！佢呢就幫手 refer 咗20位朋友嘅。如果你都想有機會贏到第3塊地嘅1萬蚊呢，簡單咁訂閱我要做富翁嘅 YouTube， 然後去到下面連結報名，遊戲玩到最後面呢，仲會釋放終極30萬首期幫你上車㗎。我哋遊戲係歡迎任何地區人士參加，詳情去返我哋遊戲網頁睇返啦。哇！今次嘅茶敘投資講座呢，非常之架勢啦。咁咧重點咧，我哋會公布2021年咧，我哋揾咗嘅選股名單，加埋咧英 Sir 咧都會強勢登陸而分享咧佢個選股名單嘅噃。咁去到最後咧，我都會公布我真實組合入邊咧2隻嘅愛股嘅咁強名單，10月18號準時見大家啦。今個禮拜仲有好多其他嘅免費線上分享會，全球朋友都係參加㗎。我哋有期指、期權、英國房地產、程式交易同埋美股班，大家記住參加啦。仲未訂閱富翁電視 MTTV， 快啲去訂閱啦！